Zach always referred to it as a beach house, but, in fact, it was of that industrial style of architecture that made it look more like a misplaced storage facility. There was steel involved, and talk of tensile forces, and given that Zach's neighbours already considered him to be a crass city dweller with no respect for surrounding sand dunes, Jess could envisage raised voices which she didn't foresee doing much for her headache, so she opted to quietly nurse her hangover solo with the aid of some fresh coffee, a free sample from Colombia via Philippe, which was very generous of him given that he usually sold the stuff for £5 a cup. Unable to sleep, she'd risen early that morning, creeping down the staircase and onto her mother's old shaker-style chair next to the Arga in the kitchen. Smudge, her border collie, had loyally migrated from his basket to lie on top of her feet, squeezing his eyes shut and keeping her toes warm while they'd waited together for the sun to rise. 1 year with Zach, yet all she could think about when she closed her eyes was Matthew.
"Where are my fucking keys?"
Zach was raging now, his neck going pink as he turned over the contents of Jess's living room with escalating frustration like a drug addict in urgent need of items to sell for cash.
Jesus, Jessica, if you actually chucked out some of this junk, then maybe you wouldn't lose things so often.
The junk he referred to, her trinkets made from driftwood, collection of vintage postcards, half-burnt candles, old photographs and miniature glass milk bottles, was scattered lovingly across her stuffed, creaking bookcases, mantelpiece, mismatched furniture and upright piano that still had the Book of Christmas Carols open on Joy to the World. She knew that it was ramshackle and tumble down, and that it all probably could have done with a squirt of furniture polish. But it was her. "I like my junk," Jess replied, feeling a little bit riled that Zach was criticising her for losing things while he looked for something he'd lost. Finally, he located his keys within the folds of her cotton paisley scarf, which he'd hastily unwound on her behalf last night before discarding it on the sideboard.
"Okay,"
he said, shaking his head and bending down to kiss her where she was curled up on the sofa.
"I'll see you tonight. I'll pick you up at 7, okay? Be ready."
She nodded up at him, hands wrapped round the coffee cup. He'd surprised her with a dinner reservation at Burnham Manor, where apparently there was no leeway for being late as they served the food in a single sitting, shouting out the Michelin-starred menu to a room full of salivating food fanatics. "Dress up!" he threw over his shoulder as he exited the cottage. "Wear your new shoes." She glanced over to where her anniversary present, a pale brown paper bag bearing the famous scrawling logo of Christian Louis Vuitton, was resting by the fireplace. Inside, a matching cardboard box stuffed with folds of creamy tissue paper and nestled down amongst it all, a pair of shoes. Flawless black patent with distinctive scarlet soles, heels not much sturdier than chopsticks. Her stomach had churned when she'd opened the box, partly because she suspected Zach was still basing all his gift choices on the things that had made Octavia happy, but partly because the shoes were 2 sizes too small, and she hadn't the heart to tell him. As lunchtime approached, Jess took a shower, soaping her skin in something vanilla-scented and finishing with a blast of cold water for her damaged leg. Admittedly not the ice she'd been advised to use, but the sole item currently in her freezer was an oversized portion of homemade beef lasagna, and she could only think that combining it with compression and elevation would result in half-thawed beef and marinara sauce becoming inconveniently smeared across her sofa and thighs. She finally chased away the stubborn dregs of her hangover with a late lunch, caramelizing some cauliflower in the Arga with olive oil and coarse sea salt.